All right. Good morning, everyone. Hello to everyone who managed to find the far back corner of the exhibit hall. I'm Dr. Kenneth Stein, Chief Medical Officer for Boston Scientific. Uh, and what I want to do over the course of the next 20 minutes is explore some real use cases for artificial intelligence in clinical cardiology. I want to begin, though, with the why. And the why is that doctors and healthcare practitioners are drowning in data. And those of you who are interested in how to use AI need to recognize that as the fundamental problem that we need to attack. And I want to posit that judicious use of artificial intelligence that really understands the use case, can help us transform data into actionable information, which is key. And as examples, I want to give 3 use cases of AI that are already embodied in our devices in Boston Scientific. To begin, the healthcare system is literally drowning in data, drowning in both signal and in noise. The medical literature, when I went to medical school, doubled roughly every 7 years. Today, the medical literature doubles every 7 months. It's impossible for any human being to keep up with that. 1 in 10 Americans will be implanted at some point in their lives with the medical device, and many of those devices today transmit data to providers and to the cloud. 1 in 3 American adults wear a smartwatch, or I've got 2 wearables on right now. And healthcare data is estimated to be growing at a CAGR of nearly 50% year over year for the foreseeable future. And the problem is, I think, that if you look at a lot of the healthcare industry, we've taken the approach, that all we have to do is provide even more data to doctors on top of this, and doctors will know what to do with it. And as a doc, and I don't want to upset any of the non-medical professionals in the audience. Fact is, we don't know what to do with that data. And I posit that what the industry needs to do is not just to dump more data on physicians, right? But to provide actionable data, all right? Informative data. And that turning data into information is one of our key responsibilities. And that it is then the responsibility of the healthcare system to turn actionable data into action. I think that in some ways, what we need to go through is similar to the evolution of industrial maintenance over the past decade or so. And again, not to get any of the healthcare professionals of the audience upset, all right? But we need to turn the practice of medicine into something that is much more like automobile maintenance. And what I mean by that is, historically, automobile maintenance was you drove your car until something went wrong. Something went wrong, you took it into the shop, it got fixed. And then the first step in the evolution was, well, all right, so every 30,000 miles or so, you bring the car into the shop for a preventive checkup. Right? But none of our cars work that way today. Right? Today, our cars all have multiple different sensors in them that can predict and give warning before something goes wrong so that you can get preventive maintenance when you need it. And the healthcare system today is still stuck in those first 2 paradigms, right? If you're a patient with congestive heart failure, you get put on a medical regimen, and the odds are your physician isn't going to do anything about that therapeutic regimen until you show up in the emergency room because something has gone wrong. Or your doc will want you to come into the office and see him every 3 months, irrespective of whether you're doing well or not. And I'd submit that what we need to do is transform into a system that can triage care, find the patients who need more care, give it to them when they need it. So I want to go through 3 different use cases now for AI in cardiology. And for those of you who are developing AI-based platforms in medicine, I think it's really important to understand the use case. It's funny, I walked around the hall before finding this corner. I think AI today is a lot like the weather, in that there are a hell of a lot of people talking about it. I'm not sure how much we're doing about it. And again, I'd say fundamentally, right, from a research and development perspective, it's critical to understand your use case. And I think, pretty simply, there's a taxonomy of 3 potential use cases for AI in medicine. All right. And I'll show examples of each of the 3. One is using AI to do something that humans cannot possibly do. Okay. One is to take something that few humans can do well, but that the majority can't. So to democratize care. And the third is to do something that humans just can't do at scale. All right. To improve the efficiency of the care platform. I'm going to start with that last one. All right. So how do we use AI in Boston Scientific to take something that, you could do if you had the time and the resources, but you can't do at scale and be practical. All right. And that's the use in our ambulatory EKG, electrocardiogram monitors. Right? So we have a division that sells a product that does what's called long-term EKG monitoring. You put a patch-based monitor on a patient, and you can monitor them for up to 30 days to detect whether they're having any potentially actionable arrhythmias. Now, human beings have roughly 100,000 heartbeats per day. So 30 days of monitoring, the math's easy, that's 30 million beats that you need to analyze and say, do any of them reflect any dangerous abnormalities in the heart's rhythm, right? So that's something that, on a single EKG, any trained professional can do, but that you obviously cannot do at large scale. And so we developed an AI platform we call BeatLogic that goes through that 30 days of 100,000 heartbeats and is able to pick out the strips that show an abnormal rhythm, classify the rhythm, and then pass those on to human beings for verification. The second use case I mentioned, and it's a very interesting one, is what I call democratizing care. One of the things I point out is the present company excluded. In any given room, half of that doctors in that room are in the bottom half of doctors in that room. All right. Medical care and capabilities, run a spectrum. It's no different than any other sort of expertise. The example I'm going to show for you now involves the use of AI to improve the interpretation of ultrasound images. I want to speak to specifically a procedure that's called intracoronary or intravascular ultrasound imaging. All right. Coronary disease is the number 1 cause of death in the United States today. There are roughly 1 million angioplasties, right? Doing a procedure where you put a catheter inside a blood vessel, reopen an occluded blood vessel in the United States. 1 in 10 of those patients will need a repeat procedure at some point over the year. Now, there is incredibly strong clinical trial evidence that for patients with complicated coronary artery disease, and maybe that's 20 to 30% of the procedures that are done annually in the United States, right, that outcomes are better if they're accompanied by threading a very small catheter with an ultrasound crystal on it into the artery and getting really detailed images of that artery before you go ahead and do the procedure to blow it up. That evidence is so strong that guidelines in the United States and in Europe all consider that what's called a class 1 recommendation, that this should be done in every case of complex coronary artery disease. The reality is it's not only not done in every case of complex coronary disease, it's actually only done in a minority of cases where it could be beneficial. And that's because the majority of folks doing these procedures don't have the elite skill set that's required to interpret the images. So the solution is train up an AI using machine learning, right, to do automated lesion detection and interpretation for the physician doing the procedures. So we've embedded that within our IVUS platform. It's a platform called Avigo Plus, and we've seen, since it's been released, a dramatic increase in the appropriate utilization of this kind of imaging procedure to support these complex coronary artery interventions. The last that I want to speak about, and it may well be the most exciting use case for artificial intelligence, is to be able to do something that no one could possibly do with human eyes and human intelligence only. And AI is exquisitely good at recognizing patterns in data that are blind to the human eye. So I want to talk about the use of artificial intelligence-based algorithms to help in the early diagnosis and prediction of adverse outcomes. In this case, in a syndrome called heart failure. So heart failure is our term for what happens when the heart, for whatever reason, can no longer pump enough blood with every beat to sustain the body's metabolic needs. Heart failure causes more hospitalizations in patients over the age of 65 than any other condition in the developed world. It's 1 million hospitalizations per year in the United States alone. It is the second leading cause of hospitalization and rehospitalization in the United States. And it is a chronic relapsing condition. So patients will have heart failure. They'll suddenly get worse. They'll need to be admitted to the hospital. They'll be in the hospital for 3 days, a week, or 2 weeks, all right? Get tuned up, get discharged to home. And a quarter of patients will then be readmitted to the hospital within a month after discharge, all right? And again, the challenge here is that heart failure is a very complex clinical syndrome. Now we know that what I just said to you is a sudden episode, right? What we call a decompensation of heart failure is actually not all that sudden. And that in the vast majority of cases, right, patients are slowly worsening over time until they hit a threshold. And then all of a sudden, the symptoms get bad enough to bring them into the emergency room. We also live in a world, as I told you at the beginning, right, where 1 in 10 of us will have some type of medical device implanted in our lifetime. And many of these devices are very highly sophisticated microcomputers, pacemakers, defibrillators, cardiac resynchronization therapy devices, right? And it always just sort of seemed to me to be a shame, right, that you've got a computer inside your body and we're not doing anything with the data that computer can accumulate to help with the care of patients. And so this now goes back to a research effort that actually dates back about 16 years, right, to say, can we actually take some of the data that we can gather from these devices that are already implanted in people's bodies no matter what, and use those to predict outcomes in heart failure? And so we developed an algorithm that's called HeartLogic. And what HeartLogic does is to look at a series of different physiologic parameters that these devices are all capable of measuring. Things like, what's your heart rate? How much does your heart rate vary over the course of a day? What's your breathing rate and what's your breathing pattern? We can measure something called impedance. So that's the electrical resistance across the lead in the heart to the device. That can tell us how much fluid are you accumulating in your lungs. And so by integrating a series of those different physiologic variables, we were able to develop an AI-based tool that we found is able to predict 70% of these heart failure decompensation episodes at a median time of 30 days before the hospitalization. So, beyond a doubt, giving physicians, healthcare practitioners, the ability to see when something is going wrong and to intervene with plenty of time to prevent an adverse outcome. So I want to sum up. I think two things, again, critical to recognize. All right. The first is understand the taxonomy and your use case for AI as you think of adopting any particular AI algorithm. And again, I think those use cases range, right, from something just creating efficiency, so enabling people to scale up and do something that, yes, humans could have done, but can't do with adequate scale and efficiency. Democratizing care, taking something like interpretation of complex medical images and transforming those bottom half of physicians into the world into elite practitioners. And again, I think most exciting, actually moving the field forward by finding out ways of doing things that no human could possibly do. And again, right, so the examples of those are our beat logic algorithm for interpreting cardiac arrhythmias on routine patch monitoring, things like our Vigo Plus system for facilitating and improving humans' ability to interpret intravascular ultrasound images, or heart logic, and being able to recognize signs of impending doom for a heart failure patient in a way that no human being possibly could. And then to come back to the beginning, what I hope is true of every one of these three use cases that I've shown you is that every one of them is not just simply giving more data to physicians, right, but is actually providing physicians with useful and actionable data. Again, in beat logic, we're passing on real arrhythmias that are seen in real time. All right. With Avigo, we're actually passing on automated assessment of coronary artery lesions that are proven, the long history of clinical trials to improve outcomes with percutaneous coronary artery intervention. With heart logic, we're providing warning, again, a median of a month before a patient has a decompensation, and enabling physicians then to know that they have to intervene and do something for this patient. And I want to just close with a final thought. The healthcare system, right, is on the precipice of crisis, if not in crisis today. And the capabilities that we're building here and the use of AI, to finally just ferret out the actionable signals from all this noise are what are absolutely key to getting back from that brink of crisis. I also want to make a very important point. One of the things, as you think about these three use cases, is that none of them are fundamentally different from non-AI use cases in clinical medicine. And in fact, every one of these things that I mentioned to you could have been attacked, and many were attacked in the past using non-AI biased technology solutions. And so there's nothing about AI that should change the regulatory approach or the types of evidentiary standards that we need to prove that our tools, our therapies, our devices are safe and effective and are right for human use. Right? This is not, and I think we have to be very careful not to treat this as the latest shiny new toy. Right? Everything that we're doing is ultimately designed to intervene on patients who are ill. The responsibility is to make sure that we understand what it is that we're trying to do, what the use case is, and that they are safe and effective, right? But I think the hope is that patients, right, like the patients that you see here, will ultimately benefit by having access to these kinds of tools that are going to enable physicians, right, to finally see, understand, and to treat patients effectively for their diseases. Thank you.